Well, welcome to this week's Enneagram Case Files, where we are diving into the Type 9 file today, just learning a little bit more specifically about this energy, whether it's one that you are trying to understand, am I a Type 9 or another type, or maybe you already know you're a Type 9 and just trying to understand and learn a little bit more about yourself. Or maybe you have a Type 9 on your team or happen to live with one. We're going to learn a little bit more about what does that mean? What is it like to work next to them? How to work best with them? And to help us do that, we do have a Type 9 informant today. So that'll be fun. We'll get to that in just a second. I'm your host, Sarah Wallace, owner of the Enneagram MBA, which is a team training company. I love to bring the Enneagram into the workplace for workshops, staff development days, because, I always say we've spent so much time learning about other people. How much time do we really get to learn about ourselves? So I love when companies dedicate time to helping us learn about ourselves. And then by doing so, we have a chance to also understand all the other ways people are viewing the world. Our Type 9 is known as the peacemaker. And I'm actually going to bring our slides open here. Let's see. Okay, our Type 9 is sometimes known as the peacemaker, the harmonizer, and we'll get into what that looks like here in just a second. Here's kind of the basic rundown for those of you who may not know, or just to get us all on the same page here. Our Type 9s tend to be striving to feel at peace, and they are looking for harmony and peace within and externally. So I'm excited to hear from our informant today, kind of how that shows up. They tend to be really focused on kind of everybody else. What does everybody else think? What are they doing? What do they need? And sometimes Type 9s get a reputation or a label as being lazy. When in fact, sometimes that's true. Type 9s, I do hear sometimes resonate with that. Others, not at all. They're very busy, but sometimes where that will come from is just they're asleep to themselves. And so the growth work for the Type 9 will kind of be waking up to understanding, before I can even speak up, I need to understand who I am, what do I want, and start to voice those. Even little things like where you want to go for dinner, I know sometimes can cause stress for the 9s. We have talked with Type 8 last week in our case file, and sometimes they can be known as natural leaders, but all types can be a leader. And so we'll actually hear a little bit more from our informant on that front as well. But our Type 9s have this superpower in leadership on a team as being incredibly inclusive and being really able to live in the gray. They don't have to have things kind of black or white. You won't hear them a lot of times saying kind of my way or the highway energy. It's, kind of looking at the consensus. What does everybody else think? And then making a decision as a team. They tend to be pretty steady and calm. Sometimes, though, because of all the managing of other people's opinions and feelings and thoughts, and suppressing their own or just being out of touch, it can feel almost wrong then to be annoyed or angry. And so sometimes they'll shove that down and it could come across as passive aggressive. I know 9 sometimes will say that they can be a little stubborn, and those in their life will agree. Sometimes the 9 is kind of, I think of them as the Hulk, calm, cool, collect most of the time. But then once they get to that level, that Hulk energy might come out. And then just because they tend to be a little bit more optimistic and maybe even kind of conflict avoidant, not always, but sometimes in a conflict situation or when they're running into a problem, sometimes the tendency will be to think, what problem, and just kind of avoid it or numb out to it. And to learn a little bit more about what this actually looks like in real life, right? So this is Enneagram kind of theory. These are commonalities between other people. We're going to bring in a Enneagram informant. Tim Brokopp is going to be filling us in here on what is life really like on the inside as a type 9. So, Tim, welcome to our Enneagram Case File series. Would you just briefly
Thank you.
introduce yourself?
Sure. I am, I guess, somewhat of a serial entrepreneur, which is I hate that term because, yeah, it's gotten overused a bit, but, it does tie in a little bit to me being a 9. But most of my life, I have worked in the nonprofit world. And in the last 5 years, have jumped into what was a tech startup and now is a full-blown org that's running called Blink. So yeah, so a little bit of everything in that regards. But I'm happy to be on the show, Sarah. I love all things Enneagram. My wife is a spiritual director, and it's something that we talk about all the time within our relationship. And obviously, it spills over into my professional life too. So great to be here.
Well, I appreciate you being here, and we will. I'm actually going to be reaching out to your wife, so maybe we'll be hearing
Okay.
from her for the Type 4 series.
Uh-oh.
But I would love to hear just kind of that whole like Enneagram in real life. How does it show up for you? How did you know I'm a 9?
Yeah, I mean, it's only probably been in the past 5 or 6 years that I've really became aware of the Enneagram, started studying it because of my wife's professional side. It became, a large part of our conversations interpersonally, and then also in our relationships, and, close circle of friends, but then, talking about our professional relationships and how that sort of comes up in that. And I've known my whole life that I've been a peacemaker. That has been, innate within me, is that I hated when things. I don't want to say that I hated conflict, because I don't know if I hate conflict, but I certainly do not enjoy people not getting along. And so, as we sort of jumped in and started studying it, it became very clear pretty quick that I was a 9 in regards to the way that I approached, what motivated me in my communication styles and my actions, the way they interacted with others. It was, I mean, that wasn't very hard for me to figure out. So,
Now, if you have any thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them. No pressure if not. But what I have found in my own Enneagram experience is that type 9 tends to be one of the more difficult types for people to understand, or type 9s maybe struggle more than some of the others in identifying their type. And they say it's because of that kind of that, oh, I can see all sides. So I can kind of see myself in all of these. And I'm curious if there is one thing specifically or a piece of advice that you would give to somebody who is struggling to know, am I a type 9 or am I a 2 or a 6? Are some of the common ones that I hear a lot, but I hear 9s kind of struggling between all of them. Anything that
yeah.
comes up for you?
Well, here's the deal. We live in a misogynistic culture and world, and when you hear the type 9 described, it it doesn't, it rubs against everything that culture would say is a man,
Mm.
to some extent. And there was some component to, as I was, reading it and studying it, and inside I'm like, yeah, I'm a 9. But I didn't want to, because in your mind it's like, oh, that's the weak one. That's the one that can't do anything, is too passive, is just sitting in a corner, is, afraid. And I think that really important part of the whole Enneagram is to understand that, every single one has strengths and weaknesses, and how you understand those and implement that is actually what allows for you to be strong and healthy and make an impact. But you do have to set aside what I would consider would be some cultural biases when it comes to the description of the different terms. Like the 4 is another one that is
Mhm.
not very friendly to our cultural norms when it comes to, you know men and women, right? And so you just have to be aware that you have biases involved in that. and embrace it and learn that, you know, if you can understand what's motivating and driving you, you actually, that's where your impact and your strengths come. So that would be the 2 cents that I would give. You know, I went kicking and screaming into adopting the fact that I'm a full blown nine and I just need to, you know, get over it. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that would
It
be some insight from my end.
it does make sense. And there are some types that have, more maybe like you were saying, stereotypical feminine energy or
Yeah.
stereotypical masculine energy. And so that absolutely can kind of influence how you're thinking about the types. I'm curious, Tim, being a serial entrepreneur and leading, different projects and ventures and teams, what is the strength of the nine energy that you have seen show up in your own experience?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that people feel safe around you. At least for me, because of the nature, you're not overbearing. You don't come in, you know, guns a blazing. You set sort of a culture of calmness, and wherever you're at, and people feel safe, which allows for them to, you know, show their true colors. It also allows for them to, um, you know, be who they really are at their core. I mean, there is a lot of strength that compassion and empathy are, at least for me, something that is somewhat natural in my leadership style. And I think that that is attached to being a nine. So there, you know, there's a lot that goes along with that. Obviously, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a bit, the weaknesses that are involved also with being a nine when it comes to leading teams.
Well, and that is actually my next question, Tim. So just curious, yeah, what maybe common, well, I don't know if you want to say weakness or just kind of obstacle or struggle that you've noticed with this energy in leading a company in your work career life.
Yeah, I think you know, it's the whole frog in the, you know, in the pot scenario where you're not willing to maybe admit soon enough that, you know, something is wrong and we got to address it, because you're, you know, you have this positive mindset, you're optimistic, everything is glass half full. But I do think that either your teammates or people you lead can be frustrated at times because it's sort of like, hey, the ship is sinking. You need, we need to do something, and you're like, no, it'll be all right. We'll be fine. Then, of course, it's too late at some point before you identify some of those things. And what I would say for me is I had to learn, when I, those inklings, right? Because they're inklings. It's not like someone's yelling, shouting at a bullhorn. You know, the ship is sinking, like some of the other uh, you know, types would have. But inklings that you'd have, you have to be very sensitive and listening to those, because those inklings are probably much louder to others than they are to you. So I think the struggle then comes making sure that you aren't, you know, that frog in that pot where the water just ends up boiling because you just get used to, you know, the temperature. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that would be probably the biggest challenge that I would say I consistently face.
Okay, it does make sense. Yes. Now, I have a question about prioritizing and getting things done. And I think this is something all types, regardless if you identify as a type nine or not, can struggle with in different ways in different times. It tends to be something I hear a lot come up for type nines, even the ones that are very active and do a lot. What I hear is sometimes I'm busy, but then I look back and I realize I wasn't busy on the right things or I wasn't doing the right things. Is that something that you have noticed, had noticed, you've grown through it? Any advice you would give to those of us, just kind of how you prioritize what needs to get done either on a daily basis or as you're looking kind of at a project as a whole? Any tips on kind of productivity prioritizing from a nine perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, obviously experience is very helpful. You know, I think I can understand priorities much better than I did 20 years ago, right? I am a wing eight, So that helps me. I'm a very, you know, I like to see things in order, have a goal and object, and sort of like these are the steps to get there. So I'm not a complete nine in that regards, but I do think that if you want to, focusing on what a priority is really boils down to getting rid of the noise in your life. If I'm honest, for me that looks like 10 to 15 minutes every morning of usually either some pause and silence, some journaling, or uh, reading some sort of, I don't know, some book or something that allows for me to slow down before jumping into my day. Because if I don't do that,
Mm.
it's obvious for me that my mind is not calm and settled. So, as a nine, I would just say put some practices into your life that can sort of get the noises, um, to slow down the noises, blur the noises, clarify the noises, something that would allow for you to understand what's happening. Because otherwise, it's the tyranny of the urgent. I mean, you're just trying to run away from anything that causes any kind of tension in your heart or your mind.
Yeah.
And it's not just conflict, honestly; it's anything along those
Mhm.
lines. So,
Well, and that kind of leads me to another question. So I know you have done a lot of self growth work. It sounds like just based on our messages and before we were talking, and so this may not be where you're at right now. And so I'm curious what you've learned from this, but I'm also in this place where having difficult conversations as a type 7 too is incredibly uncomfortable. And I feel like I have some 9 energy sometimes, or it's
mhm.
similar when it's like, oh, that's really bothering me, but gosh, I hate to bring it up. I won't say anything, or this really needs to be said, but hate to like rock the boat or upset anybody. Like, let's just kind of, shove it down or try to ignore it, but that never happens. I'm very much learning. You shove it down until there's an explosion, which then it's just awful. So any kind of having difficult conversations, and maybe it's, reaching into our type wing or type 8 wing bag here, but for any of us who kind of find those kind of uncomfortable conversations difficult to address, any thoughts or advice for how you have learned to bring that up, whether it's with a team member, a significant other, just dealing with tension in
Yeah.
general?
Well, I would say I'm learning. Going back to being an adult for 25 plus years, you learn a lot. And one of the things you learn is exactly what you said. If you try to pretend like it's not there, it will show, and it'll be twice as bad as it was as if you talked about it originally. So there's just sort of some experience of, yeah, I got to bring that up. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster. But I do think that, um, you know, that's maybe part of the 8 part of the pragmatic piece for me of just actually thinking through, okay, you know, what is the end result if I don't bring this up? What is going to happen with that? And I use the term, I know the word sloth or laziness is usually associated with the 9, and I would just say it's not necessarily that. I would say it's lack of courage. Um,
Mm.
and really for me identifying that, listen, this requires some courage, that you have to have some guts and courage to do the right thing. For me identifies that, like, yeah, this is hard, but it's the right thing. And I want to be known as a courageous person. That's one of the things that I would love to have, on my tombstone, right? Is that Tim was a
Mhm.
courageous person. He was never afraid to do the things that were hard because they were right. And so it sort of motivates me in those times. Now, I say all that, and I still, I'm always trying to, in my head, and, try to frame the conversation I'm going to have, or, think about the conversation I have in a way that'll have a positive spin, that'll well, maybe if I say it this way, it'll sound better. And, the reality is there is some truth to that. Your words and how you present them do matter. And so I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But what happens, and I have to guard myself on that, is I got to ask myself, like, am I doing that because I'm afraid?
Mm.
To say the truth or do the right thing, and that's hard. I mean, that requires courage is not is not easy, but thinking about it that way makes it, I don't know, I don't want to say sound glamorous because that's not the word, but makes it sound much more awesome, to do than if you're just like, so that would be, the way that I would think about it. It helps me at least.
I love that. I've never heard it put quite like that about kind of the courage to have that conversation, because of course it's going to be uncomfortable and there's going to be some fear around that, but that's what courage
Yeah.
is. You can't have
Yeah.
courage without the fear. So I
Yeah.
love that. I want to talk about growth and stress. So the Enneagram arrows are one of my favorite things, just because I think that's one of the things that makes the Enneagram unique, is that kind of fluidity that it has, and that you're not just a stagnant type. It's what's going on in your life, how much growth work and self-reflection have you done over the years. So there's all kinds of ways that as our type we can present. And I know you've done a lot of work yourself just for our listeners or viewers, just to kind of, again, start on the same page here with the 9 growth arrows and what they call stress arrows sometimes is for a 9, sometimes they'll call it the supporting strategy, is that type is the type 6 energy, where it's the type 6 tends to be really collaborative, and they can also be known for being a little anxious and worrying and always having a plan
Hmm.
B, which is the opposite of the stereotypical type 9, being so calm, cool, and collect. So curious how you see that show up, or if you see that 6 energy show up in those times of stress.
Well, I think that, the one of the great things about being a 9 is in a time of stress or when there's, chaos happening, is you sort of have this calm, sort of, ability to sort of see clearly what's going on. I mean, and it is very helpful. When the Titanic was going down, the 9 probably understood pretty quick that, hey, listen, we only have 9 rowboats and we need 900, right? So this is how we have to get the right people on the right boats at the right time, things like that. So when you start talking about stress, I don't think it necessarily for me comes from having a lot to do or something big to get done. Um, because it's I can see pretty clearly what needs to, like, these are the steps that have to happen in order for this to be accomplished. I think where the stress comes into play for me is, who's it going to affect, how and when in
Mm.
that process, right? We've got to get the family from here to friend's house, but Johnny's hungry, and you know whoever needs to buy a birthday gift for a party she's going to tomorrow. So, the stress comes with how do you keep everyone happy yet still accomplish the goal of getting the family to your friend's house for dinner. So I don't know if that answers that question in regards to stress, but yeah, I mean, it always boils down to, who's going to be happy and who's going to be upset with actions that you have to take.
That's so good. And even just thinking, yeah, at work, like your team, clients potentially. So I like that. That was helpful. What about on the growth side? So again, we can kind of flow in and out of these. For those that don't know, in growth, they say that a 9 will start to not act like a 3 necessarily, but step into some of those healthy qualities of a 3. And sometimes it's known as the neglected number, because 3s tend to be, in this okay in the spotlight and okay sharing their opinion and going fast and far. And, sometimes that can feel like indirect conflict with some of that 9 energy. So it's like, oh no, I don't want to do that. But really, and ironically, I guess, when they take on some of those qualities and step in and start to speak up and share their voice, that's when you'll see some of that massive growth for the type 9. So I'm just curious, Tim, in your experience, as type 3s are striving to feel outstanding and successful, they're known as the achievers sometimes on the Enneagram. How have you seen, or have you seen, that energy influence your own career, work, life, as you grow as a type 9?
Yeah, type nines think all type threes are narcissists. I mean, it's sort of like this, oh, here we goes again. Right. Which obviously that's a joke. I don't believe that. But it is, for us, we want to be, leading from the second chair people, right? We don't need to be upstage on the front stage talking to people. So there is that component of, always having in the back of your head, like what people are thinking, how you're coming across, you know, are you, is it all about you? Things like that are always something that's part of, at least for my thinking. And, I, running a nonprofit, starting and being executive directors, you are put a lot of times in sort of limelight scenario situations. And you have to be able to articulate clearly, the mission and vision. You have to say the right things to the right people because donations are on the line, things like that. So there is a component where you have to, you have to be good at those things. So, that's the whole extrovert introvert conversation too. I am an extrovert. I enjoy being around people. I don't enjoy being in front of large amounts of people. If I could keep the group to 5 to 10, that would be perfect. And, so I don't know if that answers that question where you're going with that, but yeah, I don't. So here's why I would answer that. I do so we started this nonprofit, 10 years ago, me and my co-founder, and we're both sort of nines. So we hate being up front. We don't want to be the charismatic leader. But what it has helped us to do is identify those folks who have those strengths, and then we leverage those strengths. We put them in positions where they can be what I would say, our spokesmen on things, because they are really good at articulating, getting people excited, rah rah reeing them, all that stuff. And then we tend to be a little bit more behind the scenes people, and we're totally okay with that. We have no desire to be the star of the show, which I think is actually very beneficial in the long run when it comes to outcomes and objectives of what we're trying to do with the nonprofit. So yeah,
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the questions I always get, no matter what the setting is okay, great information. Now, how do I actually use this? And I think exactly what you just said, one of the biggest benefits is that by understanding your own strengths and natural gifts and preferences, you then also by default kind of start to understand where you're not so strong at, or
yeah.
where you don't enjoy. And then it's like, okay, let's find people who can fill those gaps and really become, a well-rounded, strong team. So I'm glad you brought that up. As we start to wrap this up, Tim, I want to hear from you a little on what we should know if we are working, living, existing with a 9 in our life. And I know I put together a list of some pet peeves of what I hear as a 9. Some of them, I won't read, but for listeners who catch this replay on the podcast, some of them are being overlooked, maybe pressured to make a decision quickly, not being consulted about a big decision or a project from your manager or the CEO, whoever it might be. And then maybe even kind of having your easygoing nature taken advantage of, are just some of those pet peeves I hear. Curious what you would add to this list, Tim. And then I have a couple questions about what we need to know about working with type 9 energy. Any pet peeves you'd add to this?
I think, I don't know if I see it on there, but people, because you're not speaking, right? There's just an assumption that you're not thinking.
Mm.
Um, and it's not necessarily that you don't have thoughts, it's that you don't have good thoughts, right? There's not sort of ideas or things that you're not going to say unless you're completely certain of them. So, I guess that's part of being overlooked, but just understand that a nine is actually, one of the much more intelligent people in the room. I say that, right? Patting myself on the back, but they really are, from the standpoint of they don't necessarily speak before they are pretty certain of what they believe or understand to be true. So don't overlook their lack of voice as not caring or not thinking.
Such a good one. Such a good one. What if, okay, so you're a leader here, type 9 leader. What should somebody who is also in a leadership role in a company or as an entrepreneur, what should their team know who maybe is not a type 9, somebody that is reporting to them? What should they know about a type 9 leadership style?
I think the first thing is that just because we don't ask for it doesn't mean we don't want it or need it.
Mm.
So, it is something that I have to work on in my leadership style, is communicating expectations that I have from my team and teammates. So that would be the first thing. I think the other thing is, um, don't be afraid to ruffle our feathers from the standpoint of making us uncomfortable about certain things. You know, um, there are certain times where we don't want to make a move because we're trying to figure out what's the best move, or we're just not trying to, upset the boat or whatever, and we do need to be pushed. So even though we may come across as irritated or not liking it, it's actually really good for us and, more importantly, good for the team. Now, you have to use some discernment with that, right? I mean, if you have a real immature nine, you don't want to tick off your boss because you're
Right.
constantly being a burr in their saddle, but use some social intelligence in communicating that. But for me, I need to be pushed at times, and it's helpful for me to have someone irritate me a little bit. So I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, that's really good. And maybe your answer to this next question will be the same, but if you have anything to add, please do. Thinking of it kind of in the reverse. So if you are a leader, but not a type 9, but are leading somebody who you think has some of that type 9 energy, what should we know about helping them get to the next level, achieving their goals, communicating better with that person?
Yeah. So I think, one of the important things that I've learned about that is use I language with them.
Mm.
So what you don't want to do with a nine is make them feel like they're cornered, or that you are sort of assigning a feeling, emotion, action, thought to them. So, using words like, man, if I were you, I would be thinking this, or, you know, I find myself to be really afraid, and using I language with that is, I mean, that's really across all relationships, to be honest. You should never try to assign emotion or motivation to someone. It's not your job, and you're not qualified unless you're God to do that. So using I language, I think, would be the most important thing. I do think that, it's probably a lot easier because you're not a nine to sort of spur and push a nine to action and seeing things. I would use the courage piece of challenging them to do the right thing, even though it's the hard thing, or and again, use language that would not be saying that I don't think you're courageous, but I just want to inspire. We want to be courageous here, and this is how we do it. We So talk about stuff in a way that sort of points them to this idea or feeling of what the right thing is, not maybe what the easy thing is to do. And always just respect them as a person. No one likes to think that someone doesn't think they're a real person with real feelings and real thoughts and intelligence. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. Is there anything that we should be aware of that we should just like try to never say or never do to the nines in our life?
Great question. I don't know. That's I always think that challenging anyone's sort of identity is a sort of a bad idea, especially nines who are going to be very, already insecure with the fact that they know that they're peacekeepers, not necessarily makers. So just be very careful in how you challenge them, because the opposite will happen, which is instead of leaning in, they'll continue to lean out.
Mm.
And so use language that would be, sensitive to the fact that there's some insecurity. I mean, we all know, us nines already know that we struggle with those things. We don't need necessary, someone to challenge us to along those lines. At least just be careful the way that you bring that stuff up. But yeah, I don't know. That was kind of a vague answer.
No,
I'll
I
have to
think
think
I think
about that
that's
a little
good.
bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Just how you bring it up. Even if it's not so much what, but just kind of that how, like you were saying with the I statements and that sort of thing. So I think that was great. Anything else? I want to ask you where people can find you. So I want to hear that. And then after that, we'll close out with any final thoughts that I haven't asked you about today. So as far as learning more about you, connecting with you, fellow nine, saying, oh my gosh, Tim, it was so great. You're in my head. Where can they do that? Where's the best place to connect with you and learn more about you?
I mean, my LinkedIn is a good place for that. Basically, the two orgs that I'm really deeply involved in is Blink Tech, and then also AMOVEO Group. So one is the tech firm that I run the sales team for, and the other one is a nonprofit that I started. And I'm sure you can probably put those in the show notes as well. But yeah, look me up on LinkedIn, Tim Brokopp. I mean, I'm a very big. I like to, I'm a lifelong learner, so I'm always trying to understand how people think and new ideas. And LinkedIn's been great for me on that. So that's a good place to look me up. And then I have Instagram, but I don't do much on that, to be honest. So
Okay. Yeah. So definitely we'll add those two companies or organizations to the show notes. And then it's Tim and then it's Brokopp over on LinkedIn.
that's
And then
correct.
to close this out, Tim, anything else that you would add about your own personal experience or growth or transformation as a nine, learning about yourself, self-awareness in general, to add to kind of make this investigation complete?
Yeah, the thing about the Enneagram is it really just helps you understand what motivates people, right? Why they do things, why they think certain ways, how they posture themselves. And that becomes hugely important in your interpersonal relationships with your partner, your children, the people you work with. But even over on the sales side, I use that every day in talking to clients and trying to understand what motivates them and how they're seeing things. We're all mammals, which means that we make decisions based off of emotions. And really understanding what someone, how they're motivated and how they see stuff is really important in positioning the product you're trying to sell them, not to take advantage of it, but really position it in a way that would help them understand fully what it is you're selling. And then obviously, just if you understand why someone is acting the way that they are, whether again they're a partner, your son or daughter, or a teammate, it allows for you to have so much more grace and empathy, and actually your communication skills will go, you'll actually be able to communicate well. So those things, just check it out. And some people think it's weird, but I'm just telling you, it's really revolutionized the way that I'm able to connect and communicate with people that I'm associated with every day. So it's worth your time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. What a great way to end. I will share for those of you who are interested in continuing to learn about the different types. We're going to be talking about type 1 next after the holidays. So keep an eye or ear out for that. And with that, Tim, I appreciate you so much for taking the time to share and open up. And I know, our personality is kind of one of the most kind of sensitive and personal things. So I appreciate you opening up and sharing what you did. And we will see you around LinkedIn.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye bye.